Welcome back to the Clever Cow podcast. I'm your host, Savanah Carpenter, and today we're talking about one of Idaho agriculture's most important resources, water. In southern Idaho, water supports everything from crops and dairy production to communities, fisheries, and energy. But managing that water is becoming increasingly complex, especially as agriculture works to balance limited water supplies with nutrient management and water quality. Today, we're looking at how researchers are using field data, precision agriculture, and computer modeling to better understand how water and nutrients move through dairy landscapes and what that could mean for producers. Joining us are Dr. Erin Brooks, a professor in the University of Idaho Department of Soil and Water Systems, and Galen Richards, a Ph.D. student in water resources. Galen is using the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, or SWAT model, to study water use and nutrient movement in Idaho dairy systems, while Erin's work spans hydrology, water quality, watershed modeling, and precision agriculture. Erin and Galen, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
So I'm going to start it off by just kind of getting to know you both. Erin, let's start with you. What first got you interested in hydrology and water quality?
If I go way back, I was from a family that both my mom and dad's side of the family were in agriculture, and my dad was a math teacher, so we had most of the summers off. Two of my uncles had farms, and so we go over to Eastern Washington, where my mom's side, her brother was a dairy farmer, and so milked 60 cows, and so grew up just having fun on the farm and driving tractors and hauling hay and understanding how to milk dairy cows. And our family got to the point where we could actually give our uncle a break and we would actually be able to milk the cows. Of course, when he left, everything broke down and the milk would boil or a cow would fall over. But anyway, I really loved agriculture. My dad's side came from a ranch up in Colville, had beef cows and forestry. And so for a long time, I just really fell in love with agriculture. I also loved being outside and fly fishing and hunting and had a real appreciation for the environment. So when I went to university, I fell into this agricultural engineering, which is trying to really focus on, in my mind, the balance of the environmental sustainability and agriculture. And I always thought it would be great if I could have a career where I, supported the environment, the love of water and forestry and the resources and that we have available in Idaho, as well as maintain the economic viability of some of our biggest industries like agriculture and logging. So that's kind of pulled me into it, and then ended up going to Washington State University for my bachelor's and went to University of Minnesota for a few years, get my master's, and ended up coming around back to University of Idaho for my Ph.D. And they have continued to support me, and I still have a job as professor here and doing the things I love.
Most of our listeners are dairy producers, farmers, so I feel like having that background, that commonality helps when you're talking to people because you just kind of get it,
Yeah, no, it certainly has helped me in my career, just being familiar with agriculture and the challenges they find. And even from a science perspective of the tools and how we analyze decision support and how do we manage systems, having that background and knowing what goes on a dairy farm, the challenges. And, somewhat of a sad story ending is my Uncle Gabe got out of dairy farming because of a lot of the regulations that were coming down from USDA on farmers and how to keep up. He had the old concrete floor, flat bottom dairy. And I know he had a manure lagoon that he had put in to try to manage his resources. But it's a challenge to be a farmer and manage, in particular, dairies have a lot of regulations surrounding them. So,
okay, Galen, spotlight's on you. Galen, what led you to study water resources and focus your research on agriculture?
So I've always been interested in water. I grew up in Seattle, and in Seattle you have a lot of fresh water there, and then you're also right next to salt water. So I was always interacting with water and really enjoyed that. Seattle also would frequently have droughts in the summer and then floods in the winter. So kind of that duality was really interesting to me. I was really interested in science. In the summers, I would go to Minnesota every year to see my family there. And so I'd get more introduction to some of the farming that goes on in Minnesota and see how there's these large areas that have a lot of farms and then large areas like Seattle that are really urban and look at those different environments. So then I studied environmental science in undergrad, became more interested in water quality and water chemistry. And then I did my master's at the University of Nebraska, where I went out into farmland and collected water samples in an area that had really high groundwater nitrate levels. So that got me introduced into how different nutrients can make their way from fields into groundwater supplies. And in this case, it was more of like a legacy nutrient thing. So basically, farming practices that were happening since like the 50s, 60s were causing the nitrate levels to still be high. So that made me more interested in water and agriculture. And then this project here, the ICID project, got me to come to the University of Idaho, pivot a little bit towards modeling and look and see how modeling can be used to look at nutrient cycling and nutrients on farmland and how it can be used that way.
Nice. That's really cool. So you kind of hinted a little bit at it, Erin. I'm trying to see what makes you passionate about working in agriculture.
In particular for agriculture, it's one of the biggest industries, obviously, the Western United States, and it has some of the biggest impacts on water use and the challenges surrounding water use. And particular agriculture is the consumptive water use, where the water is not going to be available for downstream user if the agriculture is using it. So it is a major part of the impact on our resources. It obviously can be a major challenges in terms of water quality, and we have great endangered species, salmon and steelhead. There's also challenges there and the resources we have. And so what I really enjoy and what kind of is my niche area in particular is geospatial modeling and understanding where pollution is coming from. Where are the problems at? And most of the time they're not widespread. They're not everyone having a problem. It's a targeted problem. Oftentimes we talk about 80% of the pollution usually comes from 10 to 20% of the land. So targeted management is a solution in a lot of cases. And so the better we understand a landscape and how the impacts of management are on that landscape, the more we can identify, well, this is where we want to target our resources, or this is where we want to develop decision support strategies or tools so that we minimize the environmental sustainability doesn't become an immense expense to the American people and to a farmer. And so I think there's a lot of win-wins. So that's a lot of what drives me is win-wins, and particular water management and combined with nutrient management, whether it's manure or just synthetic fertilizers. There's so many things. Some of the major expenses to farmers are nutrients. Fertilizers, that's one of the biggest expenses, particularly in the dryland Palouse. It's the number one variable rate cost, but it's a source of pollution for water quality, even air quality or greenhouse gases. And so what are the win-wins? Farmers would love to reduce their amount of money they're spending on fertilizers. We would love it from an environmental perspective and from a profitability perspective. And so there's win-wins. And so I guess that drives me is how do I identify, characterize a problem, come up with win-win solutions. And oftentimes what we're dealing with here is spatially, where is the pollution coming from? And so understand the landscape and how we might manage it better.
Do you have anything you want to add, Galen? What makes you passionate about working in agriculture?
Yeah, I think that agriculture is a huge part of our daily lives, whether we're directly involved with it or indirectly by consuming food. So I mean, everyone consumes food, so everyone is involved in agriculture in some way. And I think that, there's a lot of opportunities to potentially make things more efficient with agriculture, and we're always striving to make agriculture more efficient. That's always been happening throughout all of human history. And so to kind of continue along that, and for my work in particular, looking at the nutrient side of things, like what Erin was saying, and seeing if there are some improvements that we can make with nutrient management to be able to make nutrients stretch further and then have potentially less nutrient losses from fields.
So I want to talk a bit about why water use matters in Idaho agriculture specifically. So Idaho is one of the top states for irrigated agriculture. What makes this region unique when it comes to irrigation demand and water stress?
Idaho, and this is something we can really brag about, we're one of the first states to ever have a full adjudication process done on the Eastern Snake Plain. And the water we use in agriculture, particularly on the Snake Plain and the Eastern Snake Plain, where much of our irrigated agriculture is, from groundwater and surface water. And there's just a long history of early settlers coming to the region and being essentially granted land if they could actually provide water and prove that it can support the agriculture. And so water, has converted our rangeland soils into this very productive farming. And that's obviously why they get the Magic Valley's name. It's just this magically, we can convert land into this productive agriculture. And that's what water does. It's huge. But it drives our hydroelectric power. Our power relies on it. We know agriculture is huge. Our fish industry relies on some of the water. And so the whole water rights system, you need to manage it. And so we are at the point now where water availability, total water availability in Idaho is very limited. And we see even last year in 2024, widespread curtailment threats going on and actually threatening the groundwater irrigators because they're junior water right people having to potentially lose their actual crop because they had to terminate irrigation in the middle of the growing season. And that had scared a lot of people. Fortunately, the governor intervened and came up to a solution. But now, water management is huge. Our sustainability of our major industries rely on this, and we have to come together at the same page, understand where the waters are going, what is the solution in terms of assessing all the demands on water. And so it's a really complex process, and it's something that the University of Idaho is becoming more of a leader in the water resource side, and something our governor is really interested in as well.
Just to add some context for you all, Idaho generally follows the principle of first in time, first in right. That means older water rights have priority, while newer or junior water rights may be reduced or curtailed when water supplies run short. It's one of our most valuable resources, and if you look at the Magic Valley, before it was settled, it was just high desert. There was nothing but sagebrush there, but it's been entirely transformed by water, and so we really need to care for it. What do most people get wrong about how dairies impact water quality or use?
I would guess that a lot of people would assume that dairies contribute more to degrading water quality than they really do. I think it varies a lot by dairy because dairies have, you can have some dairies that have less than 100 cows and then some dairies that have over 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 cows. So it really varies, and the management practices of those individual dairies varies a lot as well. But I would think in general, people might assume that dairies are a lot less sustainable than they really are. And if they were to go to dairies and go on the tours like we've done with the ISED grant, they would see all the different practices that dairies are doing to make sure that their nutrient management practices are really good and that they're preventing any losses from the farm and reusing nutrients when they can with manure, with applying manure to their fields to grow the crops that the cows then eat themselves. So I think that the general public, especially people who haven't been on dairies, might assume that they're probably a little bit less sustainable and might be contributing more to water quality impairments and things than they really are.
Yeah, it's so easy to do stereotypes, and I think the dairymen get stereotyped way too much. Some of our biggest partners, especially in CAFE, has been the Idaho Dairymen's Association, and they actually have a call out for proposals for environmental sustainability. They are seeking ways to become more sustainable. They know that dairies can have a great potential of being sources, and we don't want to deny that, but there is also ways to manage this. And some of the dairy industry there's so much nutrients. When you think of manure, we call it, but it's actually nutrients. These are valuable resources. It's a resource. If we start thinking of the manure as a resource that really can stimulate crop growth and reduce the amount of imports of synthetic fertilizers, we still don't have an appreciation for the value of the resources that we have. So I think they get stereotyped as, maybe as not being environmental stewards. I know from my uncle's perspective, he had a very different philosophy and perspective on that. And I think you get to know, dairymen, they're interested in all sorts of solutions to, sustainably manage their system. And so I think it's huge to have the dairy industry, and they make a big impact, and we should all be on the same page as how to make this a sustainable system and how we can actually even increase the benefit of that into other parts of agriculture, even the cropland in the region, that we can maybe better utilize the manure resources that we have.
So, Galen, your research looks at manure application and nutrient losses. What are the biggest risks when manure isn't applied carefully?
The biggest risks would be to water quality with the nutrients from manure, whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus, making their way off of fields and making it into local waterways. And then with the Magic Valley, it'd be the Snake River would be probably the ultimate point at which the nutrients would reach for it being taken the Snake River into the Columbia River and then the Pacific Ocean. So yeah, if manure is applied potentially like at the wrong time of the year, like in the winter when there's a lot of rain, when all the rain happens in the Magic Valley, and you can have runoff events, even though runoff in the Magic Valley is very minimal because of how the precipitation events occur, you can have some nutrients run off the field, especially if the manure is applied and then not disked into the ground and incorporated. So that's the main risk. Also, if you apply a lot of manure at once, you're applying more nitrogen at once and more phosphorus at once. And then with crop uptake, there's just more nutrients in the soil at a specific time. And then so when runoff events occur, you can have more of those nutrients leave the field.
So when runoff happens, like what specifically does that impact? Like with the waterways and like the aquifer?
So with phosphorus is typically it can be a little bit of it is soluble in the soil and available to plants to take up. A lot of it is bound to the soil particles, sorbed to the soil particles. And then when a runoff event happens, you have some erosion of the soil, and then that will get into waterways, whether it's streams or canals, anything like that. And then when you have a large export of water happen, it takes those soil particles and then washes them downstream, basically. So like, for example, into the Snake River, where some of that phosphorus bound to the soil will become available to microbes and algae to consume. And that is what can lead to water quality impairments.
From growing up down there, yeah, I remember seeing algae blooms in the waterways. So, I mean, I didn't know at the time what it was causing it or how it worked, but I feel like it's very illuminating to know how your, I guess, actions and stewardship can affect those types of places.
Just to add to that also, like in the Magic Valley, there's been a lot of work that's been done since the 90s to move away from furrow irrigation, which is a large contributor to soil erosion because you have runoff from the furrow fields, and then constructing sediment retention basins, which prevents the sediment that runs off of those fields from making it into the Snake River. And then the soil that makes it to the sediment retention basins or the constructed wetlands can then be reapplied to fields too. So that's helped a lot in curbing those runoff and erosion losses from different irrigation districts in the Magic Valley, like the Twin Falls Canal Company.
If I could add, there's chronic soil problems if you over-apply nutrients. There's salts in the manure that it's not in the best interest of even the dairy farmer to over-apply manure. The other thing, just oftentimes we talk about water quality, and actually I teach environmental water quality class, and we focus so much on concentrations. And really, water quality, the end result or the goal is to meet the beneficial use of a water body, and what oftentimes is a biological impact. It's like, well, we want to support trout. So trout, what do a trout need? Well, actually, it turns out trout they can take up water that has a lot of nitrate in them. So there's not a nitrate limit for trout. There is a dissolved oxygen limit for trout that is linked with water temperature. It's linked with eutrophication and decomposition of biological material in the water. That's the algae growth. Water quality is linked tremendously with water quantity. You could have a small stream that really is highly impacted by nitrate leaching from a specific field. But if that same field was on a stream that has a lot of water in it, it'd have no impact on that water body. So the water quantity and the water quality go hand in hand, which then, here again, the more that we focus on the science, and the science feeds back into policy and regulation and the NRCS of how we manage things, we need to understand the system more. And that's, I think, where the science and the university comes in, is like, okay, well, how would be a better approach? Understanding this is the site-specific location of this dairy farm. This is the impact it could have. And to some extent, there's some streams that actually benefit nitrate because fish actually like to have a little bit of algae, a little bit of paraffin on the rocks, and actually that feeds the macroinvertebrate, which feeds the food web, which feeds the ecosystem. And so anyway, maybe I'm rambling off to another location of this, but that's the passion I have as well, is in terms of let's understand the system, what is best for the resources, and not do broad brush rules that impair a lot of people and the industry we have.
So what Erin is saying is that the amount of nutrients in the water is only part of the picture. The size and flow of the waterway matter too. Too many nutrients can cause more algae to grow. When that algae eventually breaks down, it uses up oxygen that fish and other aquatic life need. What kind of tools or data help us understand nutrient cycling at the watershed level?
Yeah, I guess this is probably the focus of really what Galen's been doing. He's developing a tool or assessing the tool. So this is soil water assessment tool, the SWAT model, that understands actually a whole system. And this could be the soils, the amount of precip, the climate, what crops you're growing, understanding how that impacts hydrology, the water consumption, the nutrients that are available, how it cycles. If you apply manure, what happens to that nitrogen? I know there's carbon in it as well. I know there's soil microbes that might affect what's available. I know the air temperature affects how this becomes available. And so we just need assessment tools. And here again, this is the research community is really focused on a lot of this in terms of water quality, crop productivity, but also this could be really applied tool for growers who are like, well, what could I do? What are some options and what would work on my specific farm? I know I'm not located at the research farm. I'm located in higher elevation. We have a little bit different precip. I have a little bit different soil. What if I had a tool that could come in, describe my system really well and say, well, what happened last year? So that's describing more of what Galen will be describing as what all went on in his dissertation. And it's hard to overstate the importance of what the tool he's developing and the impact it could have, in particular in Idaho and across arid regions that actually rely on dairies.
Just to build on that a little bit, so for me with the modeling that I've been doing, one of the most useful tools that I've had has been utilizing regional research, because that helps me to calibrate and parameterize the model. So work that the University of Idaho has done in Kimberly and Twin Falls, the work that the USDA Agricultural Research Service has done in Kimberly, their long-term manure studies have been really, really useful for getting good data on what the manure nutrient contents are, how much that varies, what is the nitrogen mineralization rates. Also utilizing evapotranspiration data, so crop water use data. When I'm calibrating the model for that, I don't want to be looking at how much water does alfalfa or corn use in the Midwest. I want to know how much water local crops are using. How much water is the alfalfa and corn silage in the Twin Falls, Magic Valley region using? What are the irrigation schedules?
For listeners less familiar with modeling tools, how would you explain the value of a tool like SWAT in plain terms?
So an agricultural model like SWAT can be used sort of in a predictive way. So you can say, like, if I'm growing these crops or applying this much manure, how much nitrogen will be available to those crops during these years? If I'm irrigating in this way, how much of that water is going to stay in the soil profile versus run off versus leach into groundwater? You can also do different climate scenarios with it, because you can change how much rain is happening during the year, the temperature is during that year. You can change like solar radiation. You can change all those things. You basically, if you have the model parameterized and calibrated well using data from the region, then you can change different things and turn different knobs and see how that affects the watershed.
Is this pretty easy for producers to access? Like, where would they?
It's more of a research model. It's not something that you can just, the model itself, it'd be difficult. It takes some time to learn how to use. There's definitely a pretty steep learning curve to be able to use the model.
I watched a YouTube video on it earlier and I was like, okay.
Like, it's taken me multiple years to really understand how the model works. So I would say from a producer using the model, probably not. There's also some other developments that are being done where Texas A&M University is working on like an AI type of platform that allows people to input like questions, and then it utilizes like the model to get them results. So they're trying to make it more accessible to producers, but since its development in the 1990s, it's been used mainly as a research model. But there's ongoing efforts to have more simplified outputs that are easier for people to enter information into and then get an output from.
I mean, I'm looking at it a little bit now. It's a lot, yeah.
So if I could just add, so part of my research is also on do a lot of forestry work. And so we have a tool that we've developed now that it's actually being used now. It's the most widely used model for wildfire response. So wildfire happens, there's a risk of sediment erosion coming down, and roads could be closed because essentially runoff increases and culverts blow out. And so they need a tool to recommend, hydrologists could use or soil scientists could use to understand the potential impacts to a landscape following a fire. And so what we developed is a complex process-based model, like what SWAT is what Galen was talking about. But we put it within an online geospatial tool, which then becomes more like a Google Maps. And so a lot of the assumptions, a lot of parameters that Galen was talking about have already been calibrated, tested, and developed through science, and they're hidden behind there. And we don't even want people even to see them.
Yeah.
You give them the ability to put in the parameters that are really important that the grower would know. Like a grower would say, well, this is when I planted my crop, or this is the amount of fertilizer applied. And then the model then becomes essentially a tool that an interface accesses. And so it's this interface to a process-based model. This idea of, could SWAT ever be used by a manager? Well, it could be. We could have actually had a model we feel comfortable, and after what Galen's been doing, we feel fairly comfortable with how the model performs in the Magic Valley. Well, what if we had farmers in the Magic Valley could actually then somehow have a interface that they could select, well, this is where I'm located at. And then we could come in and say, well, this is how much manure I apply each year. What if I dropped it this amount? And this is the amount of the chemistry behind it that I just had my compost analyzed. And so then you could actually have a tool that could be very site specific. Every time we talk about modeling, it's always a precautionary, because oftentimes I always talk to my students, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. It's a good saying to have. Models are decision support tools. I would never rely on a model to give me exactly what I want to do. I still want that person who knows the field, who's farmed that field for 30 years. He knows way more than a model of all the unique things about that field and the history in that field that remote sensing would never be able to capture. And so we can give you general trends. We could actually say, well, the nutrient demand should go down or should go up. I would never feel comfortable saying, well, this is exact nitrate concentration in your water, because soils are complex. We never know. I would trust the trends rather than the exact numbers. And so growers make a decision, bring in the agronomists or the farm advisors that a dairyman actually have. You can actually use the model and say, well, last year, we think you've had a really pretty poor crop year. Is that the case? We can use remote sensing and say, well, this part of the field, based on satellite imagery, just doesn't seem to be performing well. Is that the case? And you can actually then build this trust and understanding of how the model performs. So then someone who manages that farm could say, yeah, I think it actually does a reasonable job. And I might, trust a recommendation based on, or at least I could try it on a field or something like that. These complex models as decision support tools, you're going to see more and more of that coming out.
Just wanted to give you an example of how it could be used. So using like the equations and everything in SWAT, someone could input into an online web page or something and say, this is the rate of dairy manure that I've applied over the past 5 years. These are the crops that I've been growing. Utilize say that they're in the Magic Valley region, and then they could say how much nitrogen will be available to my crop this year if I apply this much manure. So that'd be a potential way that it could be used. SWAT has a bunch of manure mineralization type routines and things in it, and that have been calibrated for the Magic Valley. So theoretically, someone could get a better idea of how much nitrogen from manure is available for their crops that year, so that they could maybe dial back the amount of synthetic nitrogen.
I tell my students, in the mid-90s is when I started getting into a lot of this mapping software programs and models, and it would take me months to get all the data necessary, even set up maybe a watershed model that can predict stream flow. And even then, when the model ran, I'd oftentimes wait for a week to get it finished, to actually get it done. Now, we could go on some of these geospatial tools. We could do it within 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
You can just point and click. This is the stream. This is where my field is. Draw a polygon around it. Access now a big, huge historical library of remote sensing. And satellite imagery is so important and so useful. I think the most revolutionary changes in hydrology and our understanding of water came about primarily through the University of Idaho, through Rick Allen, and the ability to use Landsat imagery to actually map out consumptive water use, how much water a crop actually uses. And this has changed how Idaho Department of Water Resources even manages water, because now they can go in to anywhere in the state and look at, well, how much water did this crop actually use? This is so essentially the culmination of data availability, modeling technology, satellite imagery, all coming together. It can be put together in these tools that can make a really on-the-farm impact on how decisions are made.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's really exciting stuff.
And with like modeling water use with the SWAT model now calibrated to have crop evapotranspiration for like the top 5 crops that are grown in the Magic Valley, you could say, okay, so if in the Twin Falls Canal Company, for example, if they were to convert all of their alfalfa fields to corn silage or all the alfalfa to barley or something like that, what would be the change in consumptive water use given irrigation practices for the region, set irrigation schedules, because the model can automatically apply water at different thresholds, and that can be adjusted to mimic like irrigation practices for the region. So you could look at that and say, if 50% of the alfalfa fields were converted to corn silage, this is the change in consumptive water use that you'd see. You could also look at it from the perspective of, this is how much water is coming into the canal company, this is what their water right is, how would changes in crops affect how much water they're using with respect to their water right? And it wouldn't have to necessarily just be the Twin Falls Canal Company, of course. Like any canal, any irrigation district in Idaho or any region in Idaho could be used to look at things like that.
And the other thing would be a drought scenario. Okay, so now our reservoirs are dry. I know I'm a junior water right user. I know I'm going to curtail 60%. What do I grow? What could profitably be grown on my field? Maybe I could do some deficit irrigation. Maybe I can just cut back a little bit more. How would that affect my crop yield? And so you can use decision support tools to assess scenarios like that. And particularly for even regulatory agencies, like, okay, well, what if, would this break the economy of a region? Or, what is the capacity of this region to endure really drought-like conditions, and for how long before it really hits the economy really hard?
So I'm just curious, what's been the biggest challenge when calibrating the model to reflect real-world manure management?
Definitely how variable manure can be, how variable dairy manure can be, just to get like the mineralization right. Ideally, that would be on the front end of the model, and someone could just change like, oh, this is the dairy manure I have. This is how much of the organic nitrogen is going to mineralize really quickly, like mineralize within the first year versus...
So maybe I'll explain what mineralization means.
So mineralization of organic nitrogen is when you have your organic nitrogen, like plant matter and things in manure, convert through microbes, like are consuming it, and then convert it to nitrate. And then the nitrate is plant available nitrogen that the plants can take up. And that's the nitrogen that the farmers want in their soil for the plants to be able to take up. So if the mineralization is very slow, you might think that you have a lot, because dairy manure will have a lot of nitrogen, but most of it is in the organic form.
Okay, yeah. And
it needs to be converted in the soil after it's applied into inorganic N that can be taken up by crops, because it's not like synthetic. With synthetic nitrogen, you know exactly how much inorganic N is there. Some of it will be lost after it's applied, of course, but you have a better idea of how much is available oftentimes, whereas with dairy manure and other manures, it can vary because the rate of conversion from organic to inorganic changes based on soil moisture conditions and soil temperature and the microbes in the soil. So it's a lot more complicated than with synthetic fertilizers.
That's just an important thing to be clear, and people don't understand that, is, plants take up nitrate and ammonium. And those are what we call inorganic nitrogen. There's not a carbon associated with it. Now, a big push in agriculture right now, and you've talked to Dan Strawn about biochar, about increasing organic matter, about, improving soil health. And a lot of that is talking about organic forms. Now, organic matter can't directly be used by plants. So that's why you need a healthy microbial population, the nitrate and ammonium that a plant can use. And so what we're encouraging farmers to do is, try it. Try dropping your synthetics. Trust your soil. Maybe do it in a half a pivot. Maybe you do it in part of your field, and then do some simple soil testing and track that, or use a model to help, give you confidence that that'll happen, and start dropping your synthetics back. You don't want to have your crop stress for nitrogen, so you don't want to risk your crop yield. But what you find more often than not is that the soil has plenty of nitrate in it. They have plenty of nutrients, and you can actually go a year or two even depleting some of those nitrate levels and not see any hit on your crop production. And so the more you understand your soil and how these microbes are working and the organic sources and when it becomes available, that's the science that's really coming about. And that's why regenerative agriculture is building up.
Thanks for breaking that down for me.
Somewhat even blew my mind when I started thinking about this. If you think of the total nitrogen in the soil, what percent of the total nitrogen is in inorganic form, is the nitrate and ammonium, versus organic form? You have any guess?
What percentage?
What percent of the total nitrogen is in organic form versus this plant available inorganic form?
Okay, I'm
is
going
it
to guess
50%, 25%, 75%?
I'm going to guess 75 inorganic.
Yeah, so
Is that wrong? I don't know.
It's completely 99% of your total nitrogen.
Are you kidding me?
Is in organic form.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not even available, right, to a plant. 98 to 99%. So all farmers are doing is managing the nitrate and ammonium, which is only 2% of the total nitrogen. So the regenerative ag movement or anybody understanding think, well, wow, I got all this nitrogen in my soil. It's not even being used. How can I make that available in my crop? Well, boy, what if I can actually feed my soil microbiology? What if I put a diverse crop rotation in there that maybe stimulates? Now you hear all sorts of biostimulates. I put a compost tea in there, right? Because the compost tea has all sorts of microbes. And so everybody's trying to look at how to stimulate microbial response, because then you're like, wow, the risk is not that I don't have nitrogen. The risk is my microbes don't make it available. And so there's this whole push, and that's why soil health and soil microbiology is huge, because there's plenty of nitrogen in our soil. And so we just understand when it becomes available. This organic to inorganic transition is at the heart of agriculture right now.
That is so cool. I love learning about fields that I'm not involved with. It's just so interesting. So what strategies are actually helping keep nutrients in the soil and out of nearby water sources?
From the manure nutrient research that I've done and the various research studies that I've looked at, as well as modeling, things like that, definitely the application timing of manure matters. So you want to apply the manure at a time that will allow the nutrients and the nitrogen in the manure to be available to plants.
Not in the winter.
Basically not in the winter. A lot of times dairymen apply manure in the fall. It can also be applied in the spring, depending on what crop you're growing. Disking the manure into the soil, incorporating into the soil is really important for two reasons. One is it puts that phosphorus deeper into the soil profile. During a runoff event, it has less risk of erosion and leaving the field. It's also good because the ammonia in manure, when it's applied, especially if it's fresher, will volatilize. It will just go into the air. But if you disc the manure into the soil, then that will stay in the soil and convert to nitrate, where it will stay in the soil longer and then be available.
How long after when you apply it should you disc?
The research that I've seen has said that it should be done pretty soon after you apply it, basically like days, and at most I think like a week, or to 2 weeks. But the longer you wait, the more of that ammonia will go into the air. So you'll lose nitrogen from the manure to the atmosphere the longer you wait. So the sooner the better. The simplest answer to that. And that's actually incorporated into some of the management indices that are used by Idaho for manure management to determine. So like the P index incorporates like how soon after you apply manure that you disc it in, that will have your impact to water quality go down when you apply manure and incorporating the manure.
Also want to encourage with disking, that obviously could be an environmental water quality problem from the soil and erosion. And so another things that you're talking about of people that can do is, plant a cover crop in immediately after that. Maybe do it in the winter. If you have the ability, you still have some, in an irrigated area, you actually have ability to actually apply water, or you're in a dairy and you have some access to water, you still want to apply some of that. Maybe it's lagoon water or something like that. Grow a crop in it. Cover crops is obviously one that is really being pushed, and a lot of people put a cover crop in and actually graze it. So cover the seed cost by, using it as a feed source as well, or a forage crop.
What cover crop do you recommend, I guess, the most for soil health? I don't know if you have a favorite, or you see results from one compared to others. That's just better?
Yeah, there's all sorts of questions on, this whole, some people go with like 12 different species, right? We'll just cover everything. We'll just put a whole thing in. But in general, you think about, and really to be clear, when we talk about cover crops, we actually should talk about forage crops versus cover crops. Because if you want to graze it, that should be a forage crop. And so then that might be a different mix than a cover crop, which may be just something you want to put back into the soil. Maybe you actually terminate it and you're not going to use it for feed. So from an animal dairy perspective, it's like, well, I'm going to have a lot of good proteins and a lot of what's good for my animals. And so they might have a different mix. But in general, we can think of grasses, legumes, brassicas, or the three that you kind of use those in combination. Find there's a little more synergy between the two, where the legumes feeding the cereal, and they can share the nitrogen resources. And so this diversification, and so like a three-way mix or something like that is often what people are trying and using. And now the people in southern Idaho are doing it down there as well. And Steve Hines is a leading researcher, an extension at University of Idaho down in Kimberly, that has worked a lot with growers on establishing cover crops and where do you put them in a rotation.
Yeah, especially with fields that have high phosphorus levels and they want to bring those phosphorus levels down, planting a forage crop in the fall, whether that's barley or triticale, and then harvesting it in, I think, like late April or early May, and then planting silage corn right after that has been shown to be really effective.
Yeah, that's what my family does. Yeah.
Yeah. There were a couple of dairy farms that we toured in southern Idaho where they were doing that. Research that just came out from the USDA ERAS has shown that takes up more phosphorus than basically anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Really good to do that. And then provides more forage for the dairy cows. So it's like a win-win.
Are there any low-cost monitoring tools farmers can adopt that make a big difference with that as well?
What hasn't been used, and I've been pushing across the state more, and I've referred to it a little bit already, was remote sensing. Capturing what the crop's doing and how did it respond? How did it work? There are free tools now that are available to growers to actually monitor your crop condition. And some of the tools actually that we talked about, this ET product, could actually see how much water the plant is using. That would be directly correlated to biomass and crop productivity and likely crop yield. And so you can use remote sensing to track, well, where did it work? Where it didn't work? Well, what parts of my field are actually productive or not? And so that's a really cool spatial tool. Their vegetative index is also, some of the satellite imagery provides this NDVI, which a lot of people have heard of in the past. But now it's accessible to people to track that. And so you actually see, well, when I put it in, how much productivity I do. And maybe you can track trends. Well, actually, I put a cover crop into this half of the field, or maybe I drop my synthetics. I want to compare it to the other half of the field. And
so that was NTVI? Is that what you said?
The normalized difference vegetative index is NDVI.
NDVI.
So it's been used a lot in precision agriculture in the past, where growers can actually see a distributed red, yellow, green map that shows their field, and it's linked to chlorophyll and how much biomass is in your crop. And so you can actually see how green and how lush it is. And so then you can actually pursue spatial variability. And so like variable rate management zones could be based on NDVI images.
So how would they get into that?
The tool that I've been kind of putting together and actually going across the state, and we have other grad students looking at, is this climate engine tool. And so that would be one. I would encourage people who've never used it. It gives you freely available access to imagery. You can put in start date and end date. You can put a polygon around your field and actually pull it up and actually see these patterns. Now, this is something that we don't have extension products out, other than we have a couple flyers showing it. And this will be in the coming years. Most crop consultants or farm advisors are familiar with this satellite imagery, but some of the tools we're developing is going hand in hand. What we want to encourage growers to do is on-farm experiments. Now we can actually have a farmer try something. You want to try a cover crop. You want to try a bioamendment. You want to try reducing your nitrogen. Put a strip in where you do that change, and put a strip you don't. And then use these tools to track it with time. So that's one of the things that I see what I've done a lot with farmers is kind of this, come alongside them and we're both interested in the same question. How do we work together on-farm experiments? In this group we're working with the cover crops does exactly what we just did. We just did 3 years where they put a cover crop in. They did different mixes. We made it big enough we could see it from satellite imagery. We did some soil sampling and crop sampling, and we just meet every year. What did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? It's a cool way for the university to come in and learn from farmers, and farmers can have more quicker access to the researchers or understanding and try to interpret what's going on. And it's just a great synergy between the two. And I think agriculture is changing so fast, and it helps us keep up with what growers are doing. And I think it's a really cool strategy going forward to advance science and adoption of really innovative practices.
That's awesome. That project's going to be huge. Yeah, I love to see communication between researchers and producers. Oh my gosh, that'll be really big.
I guess just really briefly for dairy farmers that want to provide manure to non-dairy farmers, it seems like testing that manure to see what the nutrient content of it is, both for nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as potentially composting that manure, increases its marketability quite a lot. And I think because the nutrient content of manure can be so variable, doing nutrient testing so that a person that's acquiring that manure knows roughly what the nutrient content is, I think is something that is really useful.
That makes sense. I mean, when you buy a synthetic fertilizer, it tells you usually right there, like what you're getting. So that would definitely increase its marketability.
For sure.
And hard numbers. So what role might soil amendments like biochar or compost play in improving nutrient management?
I think this concentrating of nutrients into a form that's easily transportable larger distances is really the great opportunity, particularly in southern Idaho where the dairies are concentrated. But you don't have to go too far to find farms that have never received manure before, and they're buying synthetic fertilizers and could actually utilize that nutrient source, and then maybe just don't have an appreciation for the amount of nutrients and the change it could make or the impact it could make of actually purchasing organic forms of nutrients and applying them. And this is something that we could see the SWAT model being used for, is actually from a non-dairyman. It's like, okay, what would happen to my nitrogen fertilizer demand if I actually bought manure or compost at this price versus my fertilizer price? And those fertilizer prices are going nuts, and they often are your bottom line. And so when synthetic fertilizer prices are high and that dairy source is just 10 miles away, and really in the past it was only profitable if I transported manure 9 miles, now it's profitable at 10 miles or even more. The case in point here is we actually work with a farmer in the Palouse. Now, just so people know, the Palouse doesn't have dairy farms. He is shipping composted manure from central Washington to his field on the Palouse and seeing 10 to 20 bushel an acre benefits to his yield from that composted manure, and even putting down as little as 1 to 2 tons an acre of compost. That is 100 miles, 150 miles he's transporting it. I think there's a lack of appreciation of what compost is. Not just nitrogen too, right? Compost has all sorts of micronutrients that actually could bring in a lot of the microbiology that could make a big impact. And that's what I think is going on with this farmer, is he's getting benefit not as much as the nitrogen, but everything else that's in the compost that we have a lack of appreciation for. And until we start doing experiments down in southern Idaho, and maybe we are to some extent, and seeing, well, what is that impact? How about we try it? Let's try some compost on this field. And that's actually what we're intending to do at Cafe, which is a dairy farm that's starting up that never has received manure before. We will start putting manure on the farm at Cafe, and we actually start seeing the impact of this manure as a resource and a benefit. And here again, a great win-win solution for our nutrient management problems.
For anyone unfamiliar with it, Idaho Cafe is the University of Idaho's Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment near Rupert. Its commercial-scale research dairy will allow researchers to study water, soil, crops, and nutrient management under conditions that more closely reflect working Idaho dairies. What kinds of water quality or precision ag research do you hope to see coming out of Cafe in the next 3 to 5 years?
The Cafe site itself, where it's located, is really going to be challenging. It is challenging because it actually has a lot of shallow soils. If you look at the field, there's parts of the field that actually rock outcrops that aren't even farmed because the basalt is really close to the surface. Now, this is a challenge they face all across southern Idaho. And because we irrigate, we can actually farm on really shallow soils because we keep providing water. If we had these shallow soils in the Palouse, it would never work. Because you have water, you can kind of get away with it. And so spatial variability is one of the things that drives it. And so when we start putting manure on these fields, actually manure can improve soil health. It actually improves water retention. And so we could say, well, how do we target our manure management? How to develop a strategy to improve soils that are maybe not as productive? Maybe it's shallow. How can we increase the performance? Then how do we manage the systems on other parts of the field? Maybe there are deeper soils that maybe can take more manure. And so actually exploring more nitrogen use efficiency. Where is it more efficient? Can we actually start doing spatial variability? In southern Idaho, I would say a lot of people just do uniform. But in reality, there's a lot of spatial variability. Our irrigation systems do not apply water as uniform as we think. End guns are not water efficient strategies. So there's ways that we can actually start looking at spatial variability. How do you manage a farm, even the spatial variability within a field, to optimize crop performance or even improve crop performance by putting more compost in parts of our shallow soils, improving the soil depth, improving water retention, improving, impact on growth. And so I think that's some of the things you'll start seeing. You'll see this idea of, understanding the soil microbiology as well, and what's in there, and how does that soil microbiology change as you start adding manure. I think that'll be very interesting to see how these soil health indicators change. And that could be a great resource for people that want to actually start importing manure. It's like, wow, look at that transformation that happened on those cafe soils there in Rupert. What is the true value of manure? I think in the past we've underestimated the value of manure. When that value of manure goes up, that's going to certainly help the dairymen, and it's going to help us reduce our synthetic imports into the region. It's going to help our water quality. That'll be interesting to see. I think there's some really interesting things. We're going to have some field days at a cafe and get some growers together and maybe pitch these solutions, and hopefully they'll start getting adoption of some of these ideas.
It's exciting because there's so much field to play around with. To have a demonstration farm at this scale, it's very needed, especially in our region. I'm excited to see what comes out of that. So Galen, your project connects directly to the work being done at Idaho Cafe. How will this research dairy help expand or improve your models?
It will certainly help on the irrigation side. One type of data that I wish I had more of for the model, for parameterizing the model, is actual irrigation schedules from fields. So to look back during various years for different crops and seeing when water was actually applied. For research studies, they're very, very, very precise about how much water they apply, but a farmer managing a bunch of different fields will apply water a little bit differently. So to see those realistic water application schedules, having more data on that is really useful, because then I can use that to adjust the automatic irrigation scheduling in the model and have it be more realistic for the region. Another thing from CAFE that would be useful from the dairy side is looking at lagoon water applications and the nutrients associated with that. All of the data that I've used for the SWAT model so far has been using manure applications, and being able to look at lagoon water, I think, is also another important aspect from a dairy farm that is kind of missing from the SWAT model. So it would help fill in that information and get good data on nutrient application amounts and seeing how those nutrients move through the soil profile.
And I think there's a value in models in particular, and for all this, as we start talking about changes in organic matter, we know changes in soil organic matter don't happen overnight. You start seeing indicators after 5 years or maybe 10 years. And so long-term data sets are so important. They're very expensive to maintain, and it's hard to keep conducting research on growers' farms. On-farm experiments are usually just a specific question, although we have had growers that we've done their fields for quite a while too. So the USDA ARS in Kimberly, so April Latham, is really a really key driver in keeping long-term research on manure plot studies done in Kimberly. Really helped us understand that. Without that data set, I think I would have a lot less confidence in the model being developed. Now, CAFE, here's a long-term investment. The university is going to be in it. Universities will be doing the soil data collection and the crop monitoring, the water monitoring, and keeping that records and going long-term. Come back 10 to 15 years from now, we're going to see that transition of the whole farm. Having the data records is just going to help our modeling tools and our confidence in what we can do. Like I say, it's a great investment from the state and the university. And I know the Idaho Dairymen's Association was part of making this happen. And a lot of funders across the state make this happen, that hopefully they realize the importance and how vital that resource will be to advancing our understanding and really testing on some of these strategies that I think the region could adopt.
As you guys have been talking about your collaborators that you've been working with, what do you think makes a good partnership when it comes to water research?
Yeah, I think most of my research of my career has been made on applied research. I just want to have something at the end of my project I can say to a grower or a collaborator that maybe helps make a difference. For me, the more that you can incorporate in the people that are using the resource, so having growers available or irrigators, whoever's using that research, as well as maybe some of the regulatory agencies, that maybe the people that are also on the other side of things trying to work, having all our perspectives together in a room where you can all just openly communicate. And it takes trust on some of these because they're very controversial. And so have open, honest conversations about the challenges people are facing to actually direct research that'll be impactful. And once you establish that trust, then I think there's amazing things you can do, because now you're going to get all perspectives on the challenges. And sometimes for the solutions that research comes up with, if we didn't have the idea, the grower is limited in its flexibility on how do you apply water. The irrigation scheduling is one of those classic cases where in the classroom we tell people, well, they just need to irrigate right when the plant needs it, thinking that an irrigator is just turn a switch on and off immediately, and not realizing that a center pivot can only cover so much ground. If you have a wheel line, you can only come back so often. And so what are the constraints of a farmer that limit their ability to implement all these things that maybe the university scientists are coming up with? There's a research without the understanding of the challenges that managers of that resources are doing, then we aren't making any solutions. Integrating, getting people together in the same room, there you get to know people, and I think that makes for a great collaboration and great commitment to science.
So what role do farmers play in shaping the direction or application of your work?
Yeah, and oftentimes I think I come back after meeting with a farmer and I learn more, and I think they learn from me. Because I learned, oh, that's right. Yeah, spring manure application. Oh, that's right. You're seeding. You have all these other things. You're trying to spray. You have all those challenges. Now I see why you do fall manure application, because that's when you have the most amount of time. And so you kind of learn the limitations and the challenges.
And it definitely, it builds up like way more trust too. Yeah. When they know that you're someone that's on the ground and knows what they're talking about and also understands the pressures that they're under and the timing, like that's very important.
Yeah, I think as researchers, we can get very hyper-focused on the topic that we're researching. But with agriculture, there's so many other things going on around that specific topic that talking with producers directly and seeing how they operate their farms and things is really, really important.
So where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation in water and nutrient management over the next decade?
And in particular, I think that talk about the microbiology. At what point do we actually understand exactly what's in our soil? Right now, we kind of know the net response, but having the particular type of bacteria and fungi and what was the right combination of, they call it below ground livestock, right? That I need to manage. So we might actually see a lot more cost-effective ways of documenting what your microbiome is and what's in there and what the benefits of crop diversity on building up that. I think we're going to see a lot more coming out of that, and really driving that question is, how does that organic nitrogen source become available and to an inorganic form, more confidence in how that works. So
I think it'd be cool to have some kind of manure pellet or easier to transport and deal with way to package. Manure, like some kind of dried compressed pellet or something that you can disperse.
The weight and the transportation costs associated with that are probably one of the biggest barriers for manure availability in regions that have very little available to them, and just getting from areas like the Magic Valley that have a lot of dairy farms that are producing a lot of manure to be able to market that manure further away. I also think in terms of innovations, definitely automation is something that's going to become much bigger over the next few decades. From the irrigation perspective, having those center pivots that you can operate with your cell phone, where you can just turn them on and off.
I've been trying to convince my dad to get into that, and he is so nervous. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, I think those are going to become a lot more popular, especially in areas where water is more limited, like in parts of Idaho, maybe with fields that are more junior water rights holders. They'll be pressured into using their water very, very efficiently. And so automation in those cases can be really useful for that. And utilizing weather data see like, oh, this is how much rain I'm getting on my field right now, so I need to turn my pivot off and save the water for later. So,
well, it's nice to be able to see it on your phone and get an automatic update instead of having to go out in the field every single time. Like, I feel like it's just a lot of really ties you there all the time. You know what I mean?
Save a lot of time.
Especially when you're managing a dairy too. So what kind of questions do you both hope the next generation of researchers will tackle?
I think a better understanding of nutrient cycling on fields could be really useful. And it's really hard to do because it's so spatially variable across a field. But getting more data on that, and especially more regional data, like looking at the parts of the United States that have agriculture but have not had as much data collected on that region, I think it'd be really useful to collect more data in those areas, because a lot of times we can take data that was collected like in the Midwest or the East and then be like, oh, this is what these researchers found, so I guess I'll take that data and apply it to here. And in part, that's what one of the challenges with the modeling has been, is that I've been using these default values that were calibrated to different regions of the United States, but they don't work necessarily in southern Idaho. So calibrating the model for this region, because the SWAT model really has not been used hardly at all in southern Idaho before. So getting more data for parts of the U.S., I think, that have not been researched as much and haven't had as much data collected will be really useful in providing better estimates of nutrient cycling, crop nutrient uptake. There's constantly like finding that crops are uptaking more nutrients than we thought they were, or different times and things like that. I think that's really going to be a useful thing in the next decades.
I think we're simulating the dairy system from the root zone up. Now, we know there's groundwater aquifers. We know there's the Snake River. This whole thing is a part of a larger system. And so getting a better, more comprehensive tools to understand the entire system, that understand not only short-term challenges, but also long-term benefits and challenges. And so anticipate how solutions might be effective or might need some adaptive management that goes on. Going back to how we talked about the streams and water quality and the biology, and all this is all part of a system. And so decisions need to be made from a systems perspective. And I think a tool like this is a good start, and it adds a lot of potential. I'd love to feed that into a groundwater model that can track the nitrate into the groundwater system and actually see, well, we got a groundwater nitrate management zone. How do we feed the Eastern Snake Plain groundwater model and understand that from another system? And heck, we can look at it from a reservoir perspective. Let's forecast out, what are the water challenges so that we can anticipate them beforehand. And so anyway, maybe that's the modeling part of me, that I would just see that continued understanding of tools that help us assess different strategies to deal with droughts, water limited areas, maybe transformation in agriculture systems. We see an explosion of dairy. So what's the next thing that's going to come up that might change agriculture in the region?
Well, this has been a really great conversation. If someone wants to follow your work or get involved, what's the best way to connect?
I mean, obviously email and phone. I also do a lot of talks around the state, so track me, and I'd love to meet face-to-face more than online. Yeah, that's what's there. If you're on campus, come knock on my door.
My student profile's on the Department of Soil and Water Systems webpage. That's one way. Or email grichards@uidaho.edu.
Well, thanks, you guys. That was a great episode.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for interviewing us. Yeah.
Can't wait to get all the questions from all those clever cows out there.
Oh, yeah. Water management in Idaho is complicated, and as Erin and Galen explained, there isn't one practice or technology that can solve every challenge. Water quality, water quantity, nutrient management, soil health, and crop production are all connected. One theme that came up throughout this conversation was the value of having better information. Whether researchers are modeling how water and nutrients move across a region, or producers are using precision agriculture to monitor an individual field, better data can lead to better decisions and more practical solutions for Idaho agriculture. Thank you to Dr. Erin Brooks and Galen Richards for joining me and sharing their work. You can find more information about their research and the ISED grant in the show notes. As the ISED grant reaches the end of its 5-year project, this will also be the final episode of the Clever Cow podcast produced through the grant, and my final episode as your host. It has been such a privilege to share the people, research, and ideas helping shape the future of dairy agriculture. Thank you to every guest who took the time to join me, and to everyone who listened, shared an episode, or learned something new alongside me. I've learned so much through these conversations, and I hope they help make the dairy research a little more understandable, useful, and connected to the people it's meant to serve. Although this chapter is coming to an end, I hope the conversations and connections created through the podcast will continue. This is Savanah Carpenter signing off, and thank you for listening to the Clever Cow Podcast.